Okay, so we want to start. I took chapters 2 and 3 and kind of thinned them out and put them together. I know it looks like a lot of slides, but I don't think it's actually as long as it appears. This chapter 2 starts out talking about the John Benet Ramsey case. That's why her face is on here. And they're talking about her case and how the crime scene was not secured, so they can't be sure of what data they actually have. Lots of people were bit-bopping through her crime scene before they found her body, so it wasn't secured at all. Okay, so upon arrival at the crime scene, the first responding police officer is responsible to 1. Acquire medical assistance for any injured victims. Okay, so if they're injured, they need to get medical assistance first. So when the medical personnel arrive, they're supposed to take an indirect route to get to the victim. They're not supposed to just travel the path that perhaps the suspect traveled. So they want to take an indirect route to get to them and try to avoid disturbing evidence. Okay, then the police officer should detain any witnesses and potential suspects, and statements are going to be taken from them. Then they're going to secure the crime scene, so they can use crime scene tape, rope, and cones. Okay, but the idea is they're going to seal the boundary of it off and then post guards at the point of entry and exit if that's needed. So civilians and unauthorized personnel are not supposed to go through the crime scene. Okay. The first responding officer is also supposed to call for any additional personnel needs. So it depends on the crime. So if it's a fire, they would call, the police, the fire department, the arson specialist. I mean, they're going to call who they need depending on what the crime is. Okay, now to secure the crime scene, the boundaries are roped off with tape or cones and rope. Okay, the secured area should include where the crime took place and then the surrounding area if they think that there's some evidence in that area. Okay, so you put guards at the entrance and restrict access. Then whoever comes in and out is going to complete a detailed log of who comes in and who exits. So the names of the people and the time of their entry or exit is included in that log. So it's important that the investigators never do anything that could alter the crime scene. So they shouldn't be smoking, eating, drinking, dropping trash. They shouldn't be changing the temperature of the thermostat. I mean, anything like that. Everything has to stay the same. Okay, now, when they start searching the crime scene, the physical evidence, when they start searching through the physical evidence, it should be thorough and systematic. So this always reminds me of what, science, it becomes very scientific, right? So they're searching exactly through in a very systematic manner. So there's different search patterns, and that depends on how big the crime scene is and where it's at and who is there and how many people you have to help. For a factual, unbiased reconstruction of the crime, the investigator should rely on his or her experience and training to not overlook any pertinent evidence. So they have to be aware of what's going on around them. Okay, so, and you guys know this, physical evidence could be anything from something really gigantic, okay, to a microscopic article. Okay, the walkthrough. So the walkthrough is defined as the initial survey of the crime scene by the lead investigator. And the goal is to gain an overview of the scene and come up with a plan to try to process it. So that's called the walkthrough. So, obvious items of evidence are located and documented. So that makes it easy, right? Things that jump up at you should be documented. And then they're going to look at the scene the crime scene and start recording what the conditions are. So they're going to pay attention to the items or the conditions that suggest the timing of the incident and things that look like they don't belong. So like things like a newspaper or a clock or whatever, they're going to suggest the timing. Then they're also looking at things that don't look like they should actually be there. Okay, so the crime scene can be broken down into two components, two parts. So the primary crime scene, so that's where the initial crime occurred. So an example of that would be the house in which the murder occurred. And then the secondary crime scene is like the location where events after the initial crime occurred. So then they took the body and they buried it in a shallow grave. Okay, so primary and secondary. So primary would be where they were murdered, and the secondary might be where the body was dropped off. Okay, so you can infer whether the crime scene is primary or secondary by what evidence is actually there. And you guys can think of examples, right? If there's a body and there's no blood, right? So there's no blood, everything is clean, but you can see where the wounds are on the body, then it probably wasn't killed there. But then there's another location, which would be the primary spot, that's full of blood. Okay, now the command center is the point where everything is going to operate from. So investigators are going to receive their tasks from the lead investigator. They're going to store their equipment at the command center. They're going to meet at the command center. And then investigators and law enforcement personnel will communicate with other people at the crime scenes. Okay, now how would you search? So I think there's 5 different ways that you can conduct a search. So the first one is line and strip search pattern. So what happens is maybe one or two one or two people start and they go to the crime scene and they walk from one boundary all the way across to the exit boundary, and then they'll kind of loop around and come back across. My old advisor used to call this as the ox plows. So if you think about a farmer plowing a field, you would start at one end, go across, and then you turn around and go back across, and then back across, and back across. So that could be one or two people doing that. Okay, now a grid is more like a piece of graph paper. So it's 2 or more investigators. They form a grid, and so they go straight across the grid, and where they walk is going to overlap. So I guess you can think of it as graph paper. So they're going to go the way the ox plows, okay, or a tractor would go, and then they're going to go perpendicular to it as well. So they're overlapping themselves. So it's more like graph paper. So it's got lots of little squares on it. Okay, now a spiral search is they start in the middle and they spiral outward. Okay, so it could go either way. So they could go from out and spiral into the crime scene, or they could go in and spiral out. So they could go either direction. So a spiral search, that one. Okay, now a quadrant. So a quadrant is 4, or they call it a zone. So the crime scene is divided into these zones. Okay, so it could be 4 pieces, and then an investigator is assigned to go through each zone. Okay, then the next thing is vehicle searches. So investigators can look at the inside or the outside of the vehicle, so the interior and the exterior. Then the vehicle may even be searched. It could be searched at the crime scene, or it could be put on a trailer and towed to the crime lab garage. Okay, night searches. Typically, they try to avoid outdoor or dark indoor crime scene searches, so they don't want to do that because it's going to be hard to see. So, if possible, the crime scene is secured and guarded until the morning. Okay, now when they leave the crime scene, what's going to happen is the experienced lead investigator decides when they've got everything, and then they do a final survey to make sure that they've got everything and they've picked up all their equipment, and then they leave and the crime scene is released to the proper authorities, so whoever needs it. Okay, now there's way more details. Well, not way more, but some more details in the book. Not a ton.